So, how's your week been so far?
Fairly, delightfully mediocre.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've been doing one or two things, just to cheer myself up lately. Is that new BTV Tunes over the air television network recently came out.
Oh,
And
is that right?
is that we all know that the one thing Brady likes more than gaming is classic animation.
Well, that's something we can all agree with.
hmm And so, that's been keeping me pretty occupied as that spent a couple of days at work. I've been playing a lot of that new Disney Lorcana trading card game lately.
Hmm.
I'm trying to work out things with decks, but right now the
Well,
deck
is
that
it good so far?
I
Like,
mean,
is
I've
it like
been,
overall just like neat?
yeah, I enjoy it, immensely, but I think maybe the thing I have to
Oh,
work on the most is the speed of my deck because um,
yeah, probably.
unlike other trading card games where you really just have to beat your opponent, and what you're trying to do instead, you're trying to race to get a certain number of victory points, which makes it a lot like a deck building game like Munchkin, if you've ever played that.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's certainly different.
hmm and so, well, it's really just the people who can uh, put a lot of cards on the field and then tap them all to get victory points are the ones that are winning right now. you know, I was trying to go in a slightly different direction. I was just trying to put together a bunch of cards in a theme that's going to help me uh, get as many victory points as I possibly can in a single turn, but that hasn't been a working strategy so far.
Well, I can't imagine that it would be a way easier than other like card games. Like, I'm fairly sure you have to read the entire worth of like a Bible's worth of Magic the Gathering, being rules and strategies in order to get any sort of sense of what's going on and what you need to do.
Well, for the sheer amount of strategies that they have in Magic the Gathering, you know, you can pick and choose. There's just a great multitude of ways in order to potentially make a winning deck in Magic these days. But
Yeah,
yeah, Lorcana is a bit younger than that. So,
yeah. So my first trading card game.
well, I mean, it's that the game is really young. It's not that the players are really young.
Oh yeah, I completely forgot.
Hey, don't
My
lie
brain
to me.
imploded.
You're a Disney adult.
Uh,
Yeah.
No, I'm
You
not, I swear.
you have a Minnie Mouse ear. You have a Minnie Mouse headband somewhere.
No, no, I don't. I swear, my soul.
I mean, so come on. What's your favorite Disney animated film?
Hmm, probably. God, there's so many of them. It's really hard to just choose one.
Mm. Uh,
And
what
if I
about?
had to choose, it would probably be the animated Alice in Wonderland.
Yeah, I mean everybody loves the animated Alice in Wonderland. If you're,
Exactly. I mean, it's kids friendly mental psychosis. What's not to love?
I mean, if you studied literature like I did when I was in college, okay, everybody's got a little bit on Lewis Carroll.
Yeah, but also including the not so wonderful things about him, though.
Yeah. What about Disney Channel original films?
Oh, something on there that I used to love was this TV show called Jessie. It was
Jesse.
pretty much like a yeah Jessie.
Mm-hmm.
The plot was the child character name of Jessie was a nanny who wanted to be an actor, and yeah, she has to take care of a bunch of I'm not even joking, like four orphans who with one of them who has a pet monitor lizard. I'm not even joking.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about the small kind either. I mean like probably big enough to swallow a toddler size. And yeah, their parents aren't even ever home, and the only other adult there is a butler who likes to clean, but he's also pretty lazy.
Mm-hmm. And so those were like little like one room sitcoms like Mr. Belvedere, but
Yeah.
for a much younger audience because it was only younger audiences that are capable of buying that at that point.
Yeah, like kids sitcoms that don't really get into like the really dark parts about adult drama,
The
or
fringe horror of
that.
the possibility of living with Mr. Belvedere.
All
Uh-huh. Let's just go ahead and let's run the thing now.
right, let's do it.
Meow. This feelers, caddis is the raddest, has skills of the baddest, magic, slinging fuzzy full status, practically unmatched, runs all of the gamut, in fact, he's a reference games and chatting, bent wizardly hatting, questing, snacking, napping, this cat diversified, witty banter, seeking kitty answers, roll 20 to scamper, tune in, and enjoy the ride, Brady, the RPG cat. Brady, the RPG cat.
The thing about Disney is that, I'm also a comic book fan, so one of my biggest Disney properties is DuckTales.
Oh yeah, I remember watching and some of that modern take on DuckTales.
Yeah, that was the reboot, and
Yeah, the reboot.
the reboot made by millennials who grew up on that and just made a entire television show of wall to wall references to the original Disney afternoon.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I got into the comic books, the Uncle Scrooge comics from the 1940s onward, and you know,
Yeah, my grandpa did as well. He had an entire collection of those DuckTales comics,
mm,
along with other sorts of comics like Thundercats or X-Men or Marvel comics, pretty much whatever you could think he probably had.
sounds like the comic collection that I probably sold recently.
Yeah, he also sold his collection a while ago.
I mean, so it's a bit of a problem to get your hands on children's books because children used to own children's comic books, and they probably got obliterated over time. They got loved a little bit too much.
Yeah, pretty much. That's what happens with all sorts of kid stuff.
Mm-hmm. All right, so let's go ahead and let's get started here. Okay. Hello, cats and kittens, felines and felidae, humans and variant humans, and every race, class, and subclass. Welcome to another installment of Brainy the RPG Cat. We're introducing a new segment, and we're calling this one TTRPG and Sometimes Why. And so this is a podcast where we do something that we've done pretty significantly in earlier segments, but now we're just going to devote the whole 2 hours to discussion. And said discussions are going to be about the really deep resident issues or inevitable
Yep,
non-issues
the
that usually come
the
up.
nitty gritty about TTRPGs, any recent developments, controversy. He's a sudden news. If it's about TTRPGs, we'll be on it.
Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, there. What I've neglected to introduce my associate here. This is QB, my sorceress apprentice, and
Yep, that's me.
mhm. and really scary spider thing disguised as a rabbit.
Yep.
So, for the topic for today's show is what particularly happens when you decide to racially or ethnically code a a race from fantasy and tabletop RPG that has been around for a significant amount of time. But that takes a little bit too long to say. So we're calling this episode Mexican Dwarves.
Yep, and apparently, the internet has already spoken that they think this is a horrible, terrible, very bad, no good, but idea.
Mm-hmm. So, I did a little bit of research into this. I was trying to see if I could find, the section of the new upcoming version 6 player's handbook for Dungeons and Dragons that actually, highlights the description of Mexican dwarves and, where they actually might appear in the new literature. But I was soon to discover that that really just doesn't exist quite yet. The only thing that this controversy is thus far based on is the image that you see on the screen right now. Is that, just a single illustration from a single
And
official
also a bit of a
artist.
description of, and also some description from, Wizards of the Coast.
Mm-hmm. I think I might have missed that. Will you be able to pull that up a little bit, and then we can talk about it?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. But so far, and while they're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to deconstruct this picture for you a little bit. And so on face value, you can see where things have a tendency to merge between stereotypical views of people of the Mexican ethnicity. Albeit all of these people are also gray-skinned, and they are orc people. People
Yep,
who
essentially.
Go ahead.
Yes, I will keep going.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like they couldn't stick to one sort of style, and it seems they've just mishmashed all sorts of different sorts of stereotypes together with this.
Mm-hmm. So
you see a few characters wearing a certain style, other ones wearing different ones, but they all have one thing in common, and they're pretty insensitive.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of people who had previously commented on this, they say that they have 2 or 3 of these characters in gaucho hats. One of them is, a slightly elder sage type character who is a particularly obese woman. 3 of them are holding falcons, as in order to demonstrate the innate skills that they have in controlling, quite literally Mexican eagles. That is, the ones that appear on the Mexican flag, brown feathers. Relatively small-sized raptor-like hawk critters.
Also, if you look at this picture, it seems that there are a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 falcons in this picture alone.
Mm-hmm. And so obviously, orcs have the tendency to always be classified as members of a tribe. And, well, just to look at this, we're just making the suggestion that this is one individualized tribe of orc peoples. So, there's, some things that try to bring things back into orc traditionalism is the fact that the female who is in the center right of this image is holding a battle axe. The younger compatriot to the left of them is holding just what appears to be a gnarled stick that is surrounded by bandages. We would assume this is some kind of practice weapon or some kind of practice sports weapon.
Yeah, some kind of child's self-made toy or pretend weapon.
Mm-hmm.
Also, on the right, we have the male Mexican orc who does not seem to be wearing a shirt, and is also one of 3 of the orcs here who are wearing the seen as stereotypical hats.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, both of them are actually wearing that. One in the very far background.
Oh wait, it's actually 4, except the one on the back of the one on the horse has a white hat.
Mm-hmm.
But the rest of them are brown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The woman in the very far background is holding a canteen in one hand and a longbow in the other. This is once again bringing things back into the concepts of that are left behind in traditional Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, and also behind the fat woman orc is what looks like a grandma orc, which it just sort of has like a cane and also another poncho, even though it's like a bit more beigey color, but still, well, to me, feels like this seems way too familiar to like stereotypical things.
Mm-hmm. So, well, we should probably preface all of this is that um, in tabletop RPGs, you have the ability in order to make your setting into absolutely anything that you want it to. So one way to look at the image as the way that it's presented is that these are potentially the way orcs are in one individualized and specific setting.
Yes, although the problem is the words from Watsi did not specify that.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so, well, given that they're making a prototype book, it's not necessarily that they had to, but
Yeah,
so,
but it's still a pretty bad look.
this is where we're getting into the shades of gray when it comes to all of this. Is that we don't fully understand what Wizards' intent was when they came to releasing this, or specifically how much this was going to represent orcs in the future edition of the Player's Handbook. We only have this image in order to go by. Of course, that hasn't.
Oh, and by the way, oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I also want to point out that with Watsi saying that they're being, like representing multiple kinds of bodies here, although like they say they're like representing like with some of the different types of the bodies on the female orcs here, you can't help but notice that absolutely zero of the men and orcs have actually realistic like bodies.
Well,
Yeah,
there's a
it's
saying
like
is that
you know.
every man looks buff, whereas the diversity of the
Yeah,
body
it's
types
like
is.
every single guy here is supposed to look like you would probably find them in a prawn on if they weren't like gray and had tusks. I mean, again, like the Mexican orc on the right. Hey, like it looks way too close, like somebody who would be in a porno. Like come on, like
Wow.
zero shirt.
Well, I mean, I think you really might be jumping to a conclusion with that. Is that
I mean, would I be wrong though?
well, I think it might be a little bit closer to assume that we see orcs in a much more strength in endowment as a racial trait, and that's what they're trying to
Yeah, but then
represent.
again, they had the other orcs, like the skinny grandma orc and the obese orc in front of her, but like none of that sort of thing with the male orcs. I mean, we've seen
Hmm.
plenty of artists like drawing orcs with many sorts of kinds of body type. And
Yeah.
it's like fat, skinny, tall, short. It doesn't matter. But here, they're just all like the ID, like just buff, muscular men.
Well, I mean,
Like
I would say instead that that attempt was made in order to show a
yeah, but
little bit of body
unfortunately,
diversity, but probably not necessarily enough. At least not enough for a single image. You know.
it just makes it look like they're like heavily pandering.
Hmm. Well, I mean, so let's go ahead and let's put attack in that word right there. Is that pandering? I mean, so what we're
Well,
kind of meant to assume from an image like this is that, okay, so we do want to explore a different environment. We want to create a new potential environment for people to actually play an established racial type in Dungeons and Dragons. You know, we're relying a little bit too heavily on tropes that just kind of seem to be taken out of a different playbook, but nevertheless, we're trying to do this in order to show that diversity. So,
yeah, but like it seems like they took it from too many of the say kind of books is that since they still have that classic Mexico is yellow sort of thing going on here.
Hmm. So, of course, this image has been brought up by multiple pundits on Dungeons and Dragons themed YouTube channels and social
And
media.
ultimately torn to shreds.
Hmm. And so we're going to be taking a look at one of these individuals. This is the progenitor of the discussion of this image on Twitter. Is the individual from a YouTube channel called the Archcast. And
Also, I got another YouTuber talking about this same sort of thing called Clownfish TV. I'll be sending you the link, Rainy.
All right. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's start out we'll watch this video. And we'll get a little bit of 2 bits about, how this has generally been discussed on the internet.
Strap in, friends. Today we will be complaining loudly and probably verbosely about modernity and how it has finally managed to strangle the last few ounces of pixie dust out of Dungeons and Dragons, turning what was once fantastical, mystical, and magical into something boring, mundane, and normal, with this artwork being the culmination of those efforts. So this one's been going around Twitter quite a bit. It's by Mike Papp, and you know what? I'm not criticizing the artist here at all. This is excellent art. It just has, or at the very least, it should not have anything to do with D&D or Orcs, as this is supposed to be the new Orcs here. And I made a tweet about it, which went semi-viral actually, and I think it's because I've happened to post something that a lot of people understand, but might not immediately be able to put into words. Namely, that the Orcs have been reduced to just people. Because that's all these are. These aren't orcs. They're just dudes. Mexican dudes, for some reason. I mean, let's think of what are the orcs, right? Are they bestial savages? Sure, but more succinctly, they are barbarians, right? And when I say barbarian, I mean it in the most old-fashioned and universal sense, right? The Chinese viewed everyone outside of China as a barbarian. The Greeks' word for foreigner was simply barbarian. To the Romans, everyone outside of Rome was a barbarian. It is the other, the outside force, the thing beyond the walls. That is what orcs are. In my mind, orcs are an anti-civilizational force. They are the Huns, the Visigoths, the Mongols at the gates of Rome. They are the thing that come from beyond the borders to break and ruin civilization.
All right, so let's go ahead and let's unpack what the individual from the Archcast had just said, going back to this image.
Yes, sir, and I believe he put it pretty well with certain whereas that D&D is becoming boring, and which is fair. Like this is supposed to be like a crazy and wacky fantasy game that we can like mold with our very imaginations, and you can't just like try to like restrain that. I mean, like Wizards has tried that multiple times with like trying to rob their creator, so. But still. And also, like, there's already been so much established lore of orcs that has been built up and maintained for years before Wizards, like, suddenly saying like, okay, these are the new orcs, you have to do it like this now. Oh, like, look at Warhammer orcs. So, like, they are absolutely savage, brutal, monstrous, There's people who want to live for destruction.
Okay,
and that's how they've always been for a long time.
Well, so what you're saying, and also what I believe that the pundit is saying, is that there is already an established culture that surrounds the myth. The mythos of orcs, because we can't necessarily say that the history of orcs, because these are fictional characters, and fictional characters have a tendency to serve different types of purposes in every single piece of fiction that they might potentially appear in.
Yep, but you see, like, what's happening here is that, like, even with all sorts of different, like, kind of variants of orcs, so, like, they're still, like, keeping most of the similarities that orcs have. They're big, they're strong, they're not seen as really bright, right? They love to fight, right? And here it's just, like, trying to completely erase all of that.
Well, so the 5th edition of Dungeons and Dragons hosts two completely different player's handbook character sheet versions of orcs. One of them is the standard orc. The other one is the Orcs of Eberron, which is its own standalone play environment. Eberron, of course, is the Dungeons and Dragons alternate universe that combines technology with fantasy and is also the origin point for the Warforged, a very popular class a very popular race that is exclusive to Eberron in the Dungeons and Dragons format.
That would be correct.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, so once again, is that we've said, okay, there's the possibility that this image could be one of two things. One of them, it could potentially be the way that that Wizards wants us to perceive the pliability of orcs going into the future, or this could just be its own standalone concept. It could be something that they are really only going to use in a specific campaign. We're not entirely sure about that because the finished version of this manual isn't out yet.
Yeah, and personally, I'm like putting some doubt on like showcasing playability of orcs since they have like mentioned like new orcs and replacing like the old like stuff about orcs. So, but that's just a bias of mine.
Okay, and also something that we really should mention at this point. There is a really big elephant in the room here, and
yeah,
it's basically it's just a single word, starts with the letter S. And it is something that actually informs everybody's opinion of orcs, whether they have a positive opinion of them or not.
All right, say it for the entire crowd, Brainy.
Savage.
Ooh, yep, there it is.
Yeah.
Savage.
So, we're going to discuss about savagery and what its role is in current anthropology. Is that I have an article pulled up about that, and so we're going to be talking about that a little bit later. But so we're talking about role playing, basically in this discussion, and so what we have to put emphasis on at this point is what is the necessity of orcs to be savage, to be representative of a primitive culture.
And to aid with this sort of thing, I will also be talking about other sorts of savage like races, like specifically gnolls and goblin, and to help bring a bit of a comparison between more established savage creatures.
Okay, so let's go ahead and let's start this part of the discussion by pulling up your YouTube selection. This was from Clownfish TV. This was Dungeons & Dragons Orcs Are Mexican Now. You Made It Worse, Wizards of the Coast. And so,
that is essentially their title.
Okay, and so I'm just going to play this from the beginning, and we're just going to play through, because I did not prompt this video. Let's just go ahead and let's start it.
Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Neon. I'm not here with Geeky Sparkles in this video. We're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. We're going to talk about the new Player's Handbook from Wizards of the Coast. And we're going to talk about how Wizards of the Coast has successfully banished racism from the game. And they've exchanged it for another kind of racism. We're going to talk about the new Player's Handbook and some of the backlash. This is an actual image from the new Player's Handbook. And look, I'm not shading the artist of this, but this is pretty much everything wrong with Dungeons and Dragons all in one place. We're going to talk about it. Before you get into it any further, please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants, guys. So we are working on our own game engine. It's not going to be ready for a while. We're actually playtesting right now, and that's Adventure Engine, which is coming to be a competitor. Eliminated in how last couple of years.
So basically just
we've done multiple videos talking about racism in D&D and how it has to be eliminated. And this means the drow have to have like light purple skin now. They can't have dark black skin, even though I don't think anybody was ever confusing the drow with black people, but whatever. And mostly orcs. Orcs were a problem. Orcs were supposed to be a stand-in for black people, which if you think that, that's a you problem. Like I've literally never thought of an orc as being a minority. I've thought of them, frankly, as being mindless XP fodder. They're just basic bad guys that you kill to get XP and gold and whatever crap they have in their lairs, right? I mean, they're obstacles to overcome. But no. They have cultures and personalities and families now, and it's problematic to associate orcs with racist tropes, except now orcs are apparently Mexican. Is that what's going on now? Like this is an official image from the new player's handbook. Wow, this is something else. I would have expected to see an image like this on like a can of coffee or something. This is Juan Valdez over here. I don't know. This is just this is crazy. This is like, what are you doing? They're
that was a diss if I've ever seen one.
We've got a side shave on this very buff cowboy boot wearing orc. We got this kid down here who's got purple hair. Like I said, this is all of current year D&D all in one place. They're free range orcs. This one's got blonde hair, but they're shown as being kind hunters. They've got their falcons. We've got a plus sized orc on Pride Rock here. And this is something else.
It's great to listen to this and watch the person doing the commentary wrestle with his own microaggressions.
Yeah, he does make a few like a good sort of points, and also really good disses. Like it should be you'd think this would be on like a can of coffee.
Well,
and also like Pride Rock.
Let me tell you, okay, right now is that is not the kind of thing that I would want to hear about any kind of racial commentary involving Mexicans. Okay, so I do have a little bit of disclosure to talk about right now. Is that okay? I am an animated cat on the internet, but my player is actually a Hispanic who spent the entirety of his life growing up in El Paso, Texas. And so is certainly problematic in order to bring up the concept of Mexicans being represented by Juan Valdez and the Colombian coffee commercials.
Yeah, so, it's overall a really bad thing to do.
And, well, there's also just this and that from all of the quote-unquote sources that he's pulled here, right up here in the upper right corner. He is represented in a tweet that has hashtag WattKKK. Grand Wizards of the KKK fix this by making orcs Mexicans. There was something in the previous panel where it says right here, America reckons with racial injustice. Dungeons & Dragons tries to banish racist stereotypes. I think we might be taking ourselves a little bit too seriously when it comes to how we are dealing with this issue, in the sense that we equate it with a battle against potential racist injustice.
Yeah, then again, it's just like new sensationalism with some of the...
Okay. So, we're going to go back to unpacking here. Well, I mean, so, the assumptions that both of these pundits, are making is that we're effectively replacing a form of stereotyping that had already existed within the quote-unquote cultural makeup of orcs. This is something that I'm not completely convinced is actually something that exists, because once again, orcs are fictional characters, you know. But we feel as though we have mistreated them in the past somehow with their racial representation, and then we're fixing that by giving them racial interpretations that actually come from a real life culture.
Yep, that would be right.
Mm-hmm. And so, that's really just, to get the idea here. But, the big question marks that are keep popping up, at least as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to this, the way that, this is being handled one way or another, is that we have to be acquiescent to the belief that the original versions of orcs were representative of other racial tropes that existed in real life that were
Yes.
as harmful, if not more harmful, than the racial stereotypes that exist in this image.
Yeah,
And that's what
essentially.
we have to ask. Are they? So let's go back. Let's try to take a moment, and so we're gonna put ourselves a little bit on the chopping block here. Is that we need to describe what we believe the orc culture is according to the media that we've consumed.
Ooh, already ahead of you. I have the player's handbook, like the monster man, and well, right here, here to oh like.
Okay, so you have the 5e monster manual.
Yes,
Yeah.
the 5e monster manual.
Okay, so if you can go ahead, you can read that passage for us.
Yep, one moment, just gotta get to the page. Okay, let me see here. Taking me a bit. Let me see here. Keep it going, keep going. Pardon me for taking this long. Long, it's like,
I mean, you're taking the time to go through the chapters and the footnotes. We've all been there before.
Here we go. Yep, page number 244 of the Monster Manual. Orcs. Orcs are savage raiders and pillagers with stooped postures, low foreheads, and piggish faces with prominent lower canines that resemble tusks.
And that's what it says according to the Monster Manual.
Yep, that's pretty much the starting sentence according to the Monster Manual, and there's a way more, like establishing all sorts of other certain lore about them.
Yeah, go ahead and read on.
Yes, the first is Grum Shwanai. Orcs worship Grumsh, the mightiest of the orc deities and their creator. The orcs believe that in ancient days the gods gathered to divide the world among their followers. When Grumsh climbed the mountains, he learned that they had been taken by the dwarves. He lay claim to the forest, but those had been settled by elves. Each place that Grumsh wanted had already been claimed. The other gods laughed at Grumsh, but he responded with a furious bellow. Grasping his mighty spear, he laid waste to the mountains, set the forest aflame, and carved great furrows in the fields. Such is the role of the orcs, he proclaimed, to take and destroy all that the other races would deny him. To this day, the orcs wage an endless war on humans, elves, dwarves, and other folk. Orcs hold a particular hatred for elves. The elven god Kirkmillion half-blinded Grumsh with a well-placed arrow to the orc god's eye. Since then, the orcs have taken particular joy in slaughtering elves, turning his injury into a baleful gift. Grumsh grants divine might into any champion who willingly plucks out with their eyes in his honor.
Okay, so the takeaway from there is that a lot of the lengthy animosities that orcs have had with other races in Dungeons and Dragons lore have to do with the fact that they had a god who was fighting very similar battles with the gods of other races, and deployed the orcs in order to fight war on Earth in response.
Yep, that would, in fact, to be correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to go from that, and we're going to talk a little bit more about behind-the-scenes writing. Okay, so this is an article that I had pulled from Stack Exchange. Stack Exchange, of course, is just a populatable Reddit-style message board, which where some people had written about Dungeons and Dragons history, and so this article is entitled "Where Do D&D Orcs Come From?" I've always assumed that with all modern fantasy, D&D included, that their racial archetypes for their inhabitants had always had their roots from Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. And in part I do believe there is enough healthy evidence to indicate that many of D&D's orc characteristics are indeed inspired by Tolkien's orc, whether it's their physical prowess, their inherent brutality, a militaristic organization, etc. But where do they really come from? Tolkien's orc stems from enslaved and corrupted elves who had their humanity literally tortured out of them. Where do D&D orcs come from, and what makes them what they are? So, first answer. You are correct that Tolkien is responsible for popularizing the modern orc, though there are earlier references, including in Beowulf, which was one of the oldest written works in English. However, I'm sure you'll find the Orcish reference. Banan Utradas El Onwakan, all evil progeny were born from him. Otwainus owned Elf and Orcanus, the giants and the elves and the evil spirits. Here, orc is basically a replacement for the term evil spirits. Also, the giants who fought against the god for a long time. He repaid them for that. From Tolkien, they made their way in the fantasy arm of miniature wargaming, which was the starting point for Dungeons and Dragons and all that followed. The original 1974 Dungeons & Dragons Volume 2, Monsters and Treasures, says next to nothing about their origin and culture. The number of different tribes of orcs can be varied as desired. Once decided upon, simply generate a random number whenever orcs are encountered, the number generated by telling them which tribe they belong to, keeping in mind intertribal hostility. When found in their lair, it'll either be a cave complex. So what we're really encountering here is that so in the earliest editions of Dungeons & Dragons, which basically was only concerned with pitting armies against each other and having them battle, was only deriving the concept of orc culture as them being from a specific tribe and having said specific tribe have a reason to fight other members of the same tribe or the player characters. So that's basically, the wellspring from where orc conflict comes from. And that, obviously, that predates what's currently in the 5th edition manual, because they since came up with ideas about why the orcs are fighting, whereas they weren't concerned about that in the original version of the manual.
Yep, that's right. Orcs were overall, started as what would be seen as fodder, and then over time was given a bit more meat to the bones of the concept of orcs in D&D.
Indubitably. So, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1978 had this to say: Orc tribes are fiercely competitive, and when they meet, it's 75% likely that they will fight each other unless a strong leader, such as a wizard, evil priest, evil lord, with sufficient force behind them, is on hand to control the orcs. Being bullies, the stronger will always intimidate and dominate the weaker. Orcs dwell in places where sunlight is dim or non-existent, for they hate the light. In full daylight, they must deduct 1 from their dice rolls to hit opponents, but they see well even in total darkness. Known orc tribes include the following: Vile Rune, Bloody Head, Death Moon, Broken Bone, Evil Eye, Leprous Hand, Rotting Eye, Dripping Blade. If orcs from one of those tribes are encountered, it is likely that all other orcs nearby will also be from this tribe. Orcs are cruel and hate living things in general, but they particularly hate elves and will always attack them in preference to other creatures. They take slaves for work, food, and entertainment, but not elves whom they will kill immediately. So this is where, people tend to insert the belief that there was just a really natural form of racism baked into the earliest editions of Dungeons and Dragons. Once again, is just as an impetus for certain groups to fight certain other groups. They really just had some of the groups just innately dislike the other ones. In this case, it was the orcs disliking the elves.
Yep, that would be correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In the more advanced D&D, like the Monster Man, well, there would be given more reason, but overall, it's still like pretty similar.
Mm-hmm. Precisely. Okay. So there's one more relevant article here. This was the first interjection of lore into the early orc concept. This is a tale told by the shamans in the camps of the orcs when the night is deep on the world and dawn is far away. In the beginning, all gods met and drew lots for the parts of the world in which their representative races would dwell. This is more than likely where the 5th edition description came from. The human gods drew the lot that allowed humans to dwell where they pleased in any environment. The elvins drew the green forests, the dwarven gods drew the high mountains, the gnomish gods rocky sunlit hills, and the halfling gods picked the lot that gave him the fields and the meadows.
Yep, this is essentially like linking into the Monster Manual like description.
Mm-hmm. Then the assembled gods turned into the orcish gods and laughed loud and long. All the lots are taken. Where will your people dwell, One-Eye? There is no place left. There was silence upon the world as Grummish One-Eye lifted his great iron spear and stretched it forth over the world. The shaft blotted out the sun over a great part of the lands as he spoke. No, you lie. You have rigged the drawing of the lots, hoping to cheat me in my followings. But One-Eye never sleeps. One-Eye sees all. There is a place for orcs to dwell here. And with that, Grummish struck the forest with his spear, and a part of them withered with rot. And here, and he bellowed, and his spear pierced the mountains, opening mighty rifts and chasms. And here, and the spearhead split the hills and made them shake and covered them in dust. And here, and the black spear gouged the meadows and made them barren. There roared he who watches triumphantly, and his voice carried to the ends of the world. This is where the orcs shall dwell, where they shall survive and multiply and grow stronger. And a day shall come when they conquer the world. And they shall lay all of your collected peoples. Orcs shall inherit the world you sought to cheat me of. In this way, say the shamans, did the orcs come into the world, and thus did Grummish predict a coming time when the orcs will rule alone. This is why orcs make war, ceaseless and endless, war for the wrath of Grummish. And so, there's a very, just kind of a heavy, significant amount of use of creation myth when it comes to all of this.
Yep, but pretty similar to actual mythology too.
And real life anthropology as well. So it is often said that, if you know the creation myth of a specific group of people, then you have an idea of what their values are and what their animosities might be when it comes to other groups of people. And so, in the same vein, they did that with orcs, but it's also, this is entirely fictionalized. Is that, this is
it's
really
all fictional.
It's something that was written by several people so that they could have the impetus to have different racial groups and have different racial groups come into conflict with each other. And that was the principal way that the early Dungeons and Dragons manuals were written.
Yep, exactly. There's some sprinkles of referencing the real world, mainly things such as mythology here.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, no major ties to the real world or our culture or our traditions. It's mostly just fantasy with a few small references to ours.
Mm-hmm. I mean, but there is a human element, and regrettably, that human element is racism, tribalism, xenophobia. Those things exist in the fictional world as much as they do in the real world, at least according to the peer view of the people who continue to write this.
Yeah, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. And so, we did have a little bit of a discussion when it came to this in some earlier episodes. And that was before this format was created, but we were also just kind of getting together and talking about what the changes to recent Dungeons and Dragons manuals were. And this was around the time that the 5th edition, not Pathfinder, Starfinder, not Starfinder, what is it called? With the ships that sail outer space.
Something about
Yeah.
Warhammer, maybe?
Okay, well, we'll get into that in a moment. So recently, Dungeons and Dragons did have a controversy, and that controversy is extremely similar to this one, but it entirely involved another race and its direct relationship to a real-life racial minority group, and that was the
Yep,
controversy
and
of the
this the
Hadozi.
race would be the Hazadi.
Hmm. So
Hadazi.
yeah, the Hadozi. So the Hadozi, just to summarize, um, they were an ape-like people that had first appeared in the very first versions of the Spelljammer manual. That was the word I was having such difficulty with. Spelljammer. So they were
Oh, yeah.
created for a specific environment. This was the outer space environment, and the original writing of the Hadozi posed them as creatures who were originally animalistic, but they were granted intelligence by magic that was cast upon them by wizards, who then turned them into slaves. And so already that is highly problematic, even if you're not talking about a real life, even if you're not talking about a real life racial group. It's just the fact that that could be the origin for a group is just really something that gives a lot of people an enormous amount of pause.
Yeah, that is an incredibly bad way to just like even introduce like a race. Like I'm fairly sure like that would probably cause like someone to immediately exit the door as soon as they walked in.
Mm-hmm. And so I think this really kind of brings us to the center of the purpose behind racializing fictionalized groups is that if it gets too close to the way that we actually perceive the marginalization of real life minority groups, that is the first thing that is going to turn people off from the fictional world building that you're doing.
Very much so.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like you can like have like a race that like was enslaved and like just it always ends up being racist. That's not the case. I mean, the Get Yankee are thing it too, and they were slaves for the mind flayers for a while before, or they eventually like freed themselves.
Mm-hmm. And so yeah, eventually, the Hadozi story goes on to say that eventually they were able to overthrow their wizard-like leaders, and then they became free-roaming um, uh, individuals within the realm of Spelljammer. But there's another problem with that is that the Hadozi don't really have any kind of specialized homeworld. They are people who wander without having any specific type of roots, and are
Yeah, like
probably
I
treated
literally
more than
no sorts
accordingly.
of
Hmm. So
yeah, quite
eventually,
literally no war except they were slaves.
I mean, if you remember, like Star Wars, you're in the cantina, and then you just kind of see yourselves with more than half a dozen alien races that really have no context, and yeah, no specific reason to be there, no point of origin, you know. And that's effectively the role that Hadozi might play in a role playing scenario.
Yes, however, if you refer back to the Mind Flayer crews, they had, as I quoted, they subjugated and consequently worked whole races of humanoid slaves, including the Gith, Grimoires, and Kuotoa. And all of these have different sorts of lore, or in this book, and they all have different sorts of like origins and stuff. It's not like they were there just to be like slaves for the Mind Flayers. They all have their own different kinds of like things about them.
Hmm. So, probably we don't even have to go into any reading here, is that I think that we've summarized this pretty succinctly, but,
I know, it's just I like feeling smart by reading from this book.
Mm. And it's perfectly valid because we're mostly talking about the reading of material directly from the manual, and you actually have the manual open in order to read the material from it.
Yep, I got it on my birthday too.
Mm-hmm. So the way that the 5e controversy was solved was that they eventually committed to making reprints of the Spelljammer manual in order to basically not speak this history. But it isn't as though that the fictional history doesn't exist. Is that it's kind of hard in order to say that you can delete something from the collective consciousness of people who have been role playing, because they are really just they are going to be they're going to ultimately the decision is with them and the people that are around the table. They want to say, okay, well, do we want to treat the Hadozi this way? And if everybody at the table agrees, then they're going to go ahead and they're going to do that.
Yeah, exactly. It's still like a role-playing game. If anything, all the guides and books are pretty much meant to be like, you can follow these rules, or you don't have to. So like, you can do whatever you want.
Mm-hmm. And so, well, what I'm trying to say at this point, basically, is that, people are going to decide, the degree to which that they are going to interact with the raciality and the cultures of anybody involved in the role play, real or fictional. So having said that, then we can just go ahead. We can go back to this image. And so what can we say about this image to that effect? I mean, would you suggest that, it's possible that this image was released with the mindset that this may or may not actually be a way people choose to play orcs in their game?
Well, if I'll be honest, it probably would have been, and like if like a DM and some players wanted to have something like this. Then sure, this could be like something that has already been done. But after this happened, it's probably not going to happen a lot now.
We got our first chat. Is Hollyeppa says, "Hello, guys." Hello, Hollyeppa. Thank you very much for tuning in.
Yeah, I get to see it.
Okay, so once again, is that I'm going back with the initial statement that this could have been standalone, or this could have been something that they wanted to be more specific within the 6E realm. But then the other thing that we have to ask ourselves is something that we've been discussing pretty lengthily, and is that it's the humanization of orcs in role-playing environments. Does this make orcs especially human? And if they are being human, then does that necessarily mean that we are no longer treating orcs with the necessity for them to be characters that we routinely attack in role-playing situations?
I wouldn't. What I would say is that it's more like it's something that's trying to be a force to restrict us. Like we could easily have either orcs are either fun or they're pretty deep character creatures. Because monstrous races is what seems to be the main issue here is that wizards is trying to they're seemingly their pattern to try to restrict their community, whatever's left of it. When really this is supposed to be about your imagination. You can do whatever you want.
Precisely. Something that probably might be worth mentioning at this point is
I believe what we might have stuck attack into earlier. Pandering.
Well, I mean pandering. Well, when it comes to a specific type of race, is that even if magic, even if Wizards of the Coast are the people who want us to see certain kinds of fantasy races in a very specific way, first of all, that means that that's not necessarily how we're going to see them, but also
yeah, I know. I'm not really talking about that specifically. I mean, even the Latino and Latina community are especially furious about that. Is that specifically pandering to certain kinds of people who think this way, who kind of pretty much fuel the bad humanization, the racism, and this kind of thing.
So what you're effectively saying is that you're just really concerned about this leading to specific humanized stereotypes of Mexican people.
Exactly.
You know, even if it is really just, orcs on the page.
Yeah, exactly. Even though that this is even though it's the intention of even if it had the intention of being good with some fantasy creatures, like you said, humans are humans, and yeah, bad things are gonna happen when and humans try to twist something like this into their own view, in the wrong ways.
And that's perfectly understandable, and that is something that I believe that is pretty grounded in possibility.
Yeah, exactly. With something like this, you want to get away from actual things like that in the real world. That's why things are just strictly fantasy, and no real actual big and deep connections to the real world and real problems. In fact, that's one of the main reasons why people are saying that most of media just isn't being good anymore because of things like that.
Let me ask you this question in a slightly different way.
All right.
Do you think that it is detrimental or advantageous for us to have to create more elaborate reasons for different types of tribes of fictional characters to have a conflict with each other?
I would say that's more of an advantage thing. Overall, having more information about why these tribes hate each other, that would be good. Good.
So if you were to say that, then wouldn't it actually be to the advantage to have slightly more humanized dwarfs, because then they would be getting into conflict with reasons that are more realistically grounded, as opposed to the fact that they were simply put there in order to be adversarial characters in a fictional setting.
I also think that would be good too. So, it's always good to have certain kinds of monsters have some sort of a depth to them.
Okay, so yeah, there's a possibility in order to see that both ways, but
Yeah, but the main problem here is pretty much the implication is why did you make them Mexican? It's you could have had them human in any other kind of way, by multiple different ways. So many people have already come up with more human orcs, and you guys went with make them Mexican?
As I can understand that, is that you're actually putting, a much more realistic series of tropes that individuals understand about a certain group into a fictional landscape. And that can be very problematic.
Essentially, it's yeah, there's so many different kinds of good ways you can make orcs be more in depth, have better backstories, let them be able to have different sorts of alignment, and so their own cultures, old grudges, old feelings. There's already tons of ways to do that, but they seemingly just went they're Mexican. It's just off.
Here's another question: do you think that perhaps this actually creates a marginalization between orcs that is more realistic than that was depicted in the myths that we had just read? Whereas that was just a conflict based on myth and godhood, and replace it with something that actually might be a more humanized form of animosity.
Yeah, but this doesn't seem if anything, this seems worse than the original lore behind orcs, because I don't think they've even added any actual lore to why orcs would be sort of these orcs that we see here, and plus this picture alone brings up plenty of contradictions to a pre-established orc lore that we've already come to learn and know of over the years.
And so we're going to go from that, and then we're going to start taking a look at the way that orc myth has been interpreted in two completely different gaming environments. The first one is going to be World of Warcraft. So orcs play a very central role in World of Warcraft. When they made the most recent Warcraft movie, the conflict was entirely based on the orcs that were involved in the storyline. And so we're just going to be reading this as an introductory paragraph. And then we're going to move on to the other orcs interpretation that comes from Warhammer. Okay, so...
Yeah, like I mentioned earlier.
Orcs are a prolific and physically powerful race, hailing from the once lush world of Draenor, now known as the Shattered Realm of the Outland. Originally a shamanistic people, cultivating a primitive clan-based society, the Orcs were corrupted by Kil'jaeden, a demon lord of the Burning Legion, and manipulated into forming a bloodthirsty horde that waged war on the peaceful Draenei race. Rampant demonic corruption caused the Orcs to be filled with bloodlust and turned their normally brown skin into shades of green, culminating with Kil'jaeden's servant Gul'dan, convincing the Orc chieftains to drink the blood of the demon Mannoroth and thereby enslaving them to the Burning Legion's will. The few Orcs who escaped the corruption became known as the Magar, or the Uncorrupted. After conquering Draenor, the Horde invaded the world of Azeroth through the Dark Portal and waged war upon the world's native kingdoms until Azeroth's nations united into an alliance of Lordaeron that managed to defeat the invaders and enslave most of the survivors. Yet the shamanistic tradition of the Orcs managed to rekindle from the ashes as a young shaman named Thrall arose to become the war chief and lead his people in their darkest hour. He reunited the clans into a new horde and led the Orcs out of the eastern kingdoms they had been forced to invade and into the Kalmador, where the Orcs finally freed themselves from demonic corruption and briefly united with Azeroth's other races to stand against an invasion of the Burning Legion. Seeking to begin a new existence on Kalmador for themselves and other newfound races of the Horde, the Orcs founded the nation of Duradar and the great city of Orgrimmar. So we've already discussed the origins of Orcs. Effectively, that it was once a throwaway word for spirits in the writing of Beowulf, and then transitioned into probably some of the central racial characters in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Here, just like with Dungeons and Dragons, we're taking the concept of orc and then we're placing it into a fictional environment wherein they can gain a new creation myth, a new origin story, one that, just better serves the myth of the storyline that we're trying to tell. So what we should probably do right about here is we should talk about effectively how are orcs used in this environment. How is it that the way that their conflict helps to differentiate the way that they were used in Dungeons and Dragons?
Well, I can put it like this. I would see that the orcs here in World of Warcraft were essentially corrupted, and that they are subsequently both like the enemy and also like who needed to be saved, because like these guys are pretty much manipulated by this demon lord, right? And pretty much enslaved by him. So, even though it would hurt to fight them, they pretty much had to be fought because they were posing a danger to themselves, and they simply just couldn't let the orcs just be used as slaves by the demon lord.
So they come out of this because they had originally made a bargain, which turned them into the adversaries.
Yep, that is essentially it.
And so that is in contrast to the story in Dungeons & Dragons, where they effectively were never given a fair shake to begin with, and therefore had to conquer realms in order to have any kind of presence in the environment to begin with.
Yeah, here in World of Warcraft, everything was, in fact, fair, even with the orcs. Orcs, until, the whole thing is kicked off, and they had to be, beaten in order for everything to be, good again.
And the other thing that they have in common when it comes to this is that, there is yet another elephant in the room. There is something that realistically grounds the orgs in the World of Warcraft that is incredibly realistically grounded, but can still be interpreted as highly racial and problematic. And that is the use of shamanism.
Yeah, that's right.
So shamanism is a very real life practice that involves the um, uh, cultivating of spirits and the ability to speak with the dead. I can't speak too much about the very specific races who tend to believe in shamanism, but it nevertheless is something that is present. So what you
Yeah,
can say
that's pretty
about
fair.
what you can say particularly about orcs in the World of Warcraft is that they were people that were very likely to fall prey to a god that has something to do with the concept of death, because they themselves were worshippers of concepts of death. That's what shamanism represents. OS Devin in the chat says there's also a huge issue with the trolls, by and large being tied to multiple Afro-Caribbean and African diaspora. Yeah, that's absolutely true as well.
Yep, along with that would be, like, there are pretty much some problems with the gnolls, since they're like spotted hyenas, and just, like, go place to place destroying everything.
And so also, like the Hadozi, the orcs eventually got their redemption, is that they managed to conquer the evil god that possessed them, and the kingdoms that were trying to overcome them. And they eventually found their own continent and their own culture from that point forward.
Yep, essentially, they were able to win themselves a happy ending.
Well, I mean, as happy as you can possibly get, because once again...
yeah, like, happy is relative in these sorts of, like, fantasy worlds. Like, like one day you could be, like, just, like, vibing, and the next day, like, oh, like, you wake up in bed and you're like, oh, the universe is completely destroyed?
And so, like I said, we were only putting this in here in order to provide a significant amount of contrast. But, what we're doing is we're effectively highlighting where the points of realism are in any of these potential myths and any of these potential backstories. Because somewhere down the line, the human element eventually does creep into all of this. Is that...
yeah, and also the differences between all these different sorts of orcs.
And... really the best way in order to put this is that, we're all effectively writers. The immortal American bard Mark Twain famously said that all ideas are effectively secondhand. Is that we write based on our experiences, and our experiences usually have elements within them that are just reflects any of the biases that we might actually have as individuals and as human beings.
Yep, that's correct. That's just how our nature works.
All right. So, just one last article here. This is Orcs according to Warhammer 40k. The Orcs, also called the Greenskins, are savage, warlike greenskins, species of bestial, asexual humanoids who are spread all across the galaxy. And so, let's also modify this by saying that orc in Warcraft is spelled O-R-K. They are among the intelligent xenospecies known to mankind in that they possess the physiological features of both animals and fungus. They share many physical and cultural features with the dark fantasy Warhammer universe's orcs, and were initially called space orcs in order to distinguish them. Orcs are seen by their enemies, pretty much anyone else in the universe, as primitive, barbaric, hyper-violent, and crude, but they are the most successful and widespread intelligent species in the whole galaxy, outnumbering possibly every other intelligent starfaring species, even that of humanity, with a very plausible exception of the Tyranids. Greenskins are one of the most dangerous alien races to plague the galaxy. Numerous beyond belief and driven always to fight and conquer, the Orcs threaten every single intelligent species of the galaxy. Orcs are possibly the most warlike aliens in the 41st millennium, and their number is beyond counting. Amid constant seething tides of battle and bloodshed, burgeoning Orc stellar empires rise and fall. Mercifully, most are short-lived and soon destroying themselves in a maelstrom of violence and internecine conflict, but should the Orcs ever truly unify, they could crush every possible opposition. Orcs generate a potent psychic gestalt field that allows them to accomplish many feats of technological engineering that might otherwise seem impossible. At the same time, the power of this psychic field is directly proportional to the number of greenskins present in a given location. The more orcs they gather, the more orcs that are drawn to them. At the same time, the power and intelligence of the greenskins begins to grow with their numbers. So, what distinguishes Warhammer from the other two areas of popular lore that we have already discussed is that...
If I may,
Mhm.
I'll explain.
Yeah,
Yeah,
right.
you see, the previous two are pretty much like classic fantasy, while Warhammer here is pretty much a grim, dark, space cybernetics sort of style thing.
Mm-hmm. So, I was also going to further that by saying, in Warhammer, it is much more important for there to be opposing factions of warlike beings than even there was in the earlier versions of Dungeons and Dragons. Because Warhammer is effectively a game where you line up several armies of miniatures and you have them do battle with each other. So this type of orc is effectively one that is completely and totally streamlined for the purposes of battle, beginning with the fact that these are partially vegetable, is that these orcs are half human and half fungus.
Yep, they're pretty much animal and a fungus, which is pretty much neither plant or animal, but like here they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a pretty cool, like sort of like unique thing about the orcs here in Warhammer. And if I may like highlight another one of the very unique things about orcs here is that if they believe in something, if they believe if something will work hard enough, then it'll work. It's like actually using troll physics, like in the old Rage comics, to their advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if they believe that covering themselves in oil will let them fly in the rain, then it'll work.
Yeah, well, I mean, falling short of the fact that that's not actually possible in the realm of physics and science and so on.
Yeah, but still, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, some people actually do just kind of have philosophies that kind of fall along those lines. That if you can dream it, that you can actually believe it, and this is actually something that can defy every known laws of physics. But I think we're getting a little
this
too
is
far
pretty
away
much an
from
ability of Warhammer orcs.
Mm-hmm.
If they believe in something hard enough, then it'll happen.
And so it comes along with the fact that, they have a tendency to be treated as though they are a form of hive mind. The way that it's explained away that they are capable of doing things like space travel, which is very integral in the Warhammer universe, is because they just have a tendency to gather together, and then when they gather together, they have enough spores and whatnot in order to accumulate and actually develop something as salient as space travel. But in addition to that,
it has more possibilities here.
But in addition to that, there's also just a very strong tendency of them to just be innately violent and innately warlike. And so, once again, we're going into the realm of creating problematic elements in races by discussing this section.
Yes, but however, I think that Warhammer here actually does a good job at like making things not as problematic as like the other things we've discussed.
Mm-hmm. I mean, so in Warhammer, they're not alone in being the singular race that is only fighting war for warlike purposes. They had already mentioned the Tyranids, the humans, who are more than likely to have Starfleet-like purposes in order to engage in battle, and also
and plenty of other sorts of like factions with races that are also pretty much doing the exact same thing as everyone else, just like fighting.
People with religious purposes for fighting nearly constantly in the Warhammer
Yep, some with
universe.
religious purposes, some with like ambitions, glory, some because they just want to.
All right, so I think, that is a majority of that what we can say here. But, the thing that really concerns me the most in that situation is that, we're not going to see an evolution in Warhammer where, the orcs are eventually going to create more elaborate reasons for them to actually be engaging in battle. Because they are just part of a system where the battle is the thing. And, that is really going to inform how much they evolve as fictional characters.
Yeah, although in my personal opinion, there's still like pretty good reason for them to like not really be having like two specific sorts of goals for something like that. I mean, the saying is said that they are pretty much animal and fungus combined.
Yeah. All right, so we're gonna go from here, and so this is what we were planning on closing out tonight's stream with, is that we just kind of took this initial concept of Mexican orcs, and we challenged each other in order to write a character sheet in 5e that creates a more I don't know.
Less controversial and stereotypical and offensive.
Well, I mean, that's going to be left up to debate, unfortunately. But something a little bit more akin to how these characters can possibly be improved upon from the lens of somebody who is actually engaging in roleplay. And so this is the very first character sheet. Oh, actually.
Hold on.
So, okay, that was the anthropology article, but we are going to go back to that, and we're going to use that as our final word.
Yep,
Okay.
and this is what I came up with.
Mm-hmm. So this is,
If
if
I may, I'll take over.
Yeah, all right. So
this is a horn tusk who is a cavalier fighter, which is based on the Spanish tradition of bullfighting.
Mm-hmm.
Except with here, the lore with here is that instead of like with this orc culture, like instead of fighting bulls like how it's done in the real world with like cases stuff, they actually pretty much it's just like a wrestling, but it's like orcs versus minotaurs, whereas they just like fight each other for sport.
Yeah. So it's instead of that, it's a gladiatorial battle with the person as opposed to a exhibition where a person engages in rodeo with a bull.
Yep, essentially, with the minotaurs and orcs being pretty similar. I figured it would work. And the mount that Horntusk travels with is a large bull who is named Sirloin, since he was able to charge through a raining fire arrows and still come out relatively unscathed. So his name is Sirloin.
I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say that there's going to be a couple of extreme similarities between what I wrote and what QB wrote. But we'll get into that in a moment. Okay, so I'm just going to glance over the character sheet here. Is that, strength level 5, 20, dexterity 12, 14. Yeah, and then, so 5, 1, 2, 2, -2 in intelligence, 0 in wisdom, charisma. 7 strength, 4 constitution. That's an enormous amount of strength. Normal amount of dexterity. A proficiency in animal handling, which is necessary here. Athletics, intimidation, and performance. Okay.
Yeah, you'd pretty much have to be incredibly strong if your profession is to fight minotaur, or is pretty much full grown buff male minotaur. Whereas for a living, you gotta be pretty strong.
Mm-hmm. And so, let's take a look here. So armor, proficiency with armor. Okay, powerful build, 2 weapon fighting, bonus proficiency, unwavering mark. You went a lot with the feats, which is, of course, what I would do in this kind of situation.
Well, that's actually pretty much the, that's pretty much the class thing that I found for an online this sort of thing for orcs. It's as a race.
So for the fighting style that you described, unwavering mark means that you don't let go of your target. Aggressive, born to the saddle, Okay, so then, yeah, that's
Yep,
equipment.
I also gave him like 2 glaives to use, since like things like that were actually pretty much used in old Spain.
Mm-hmm. And so now what I would ask you to do is that if you would like to talk a little bit about backstory, is how do you fit this character into what your perception of the Dungeons and Dragons universe is? And in what ways does that innate racial qualities that we had to apply to this apply to your view of what the scenario would be?
All right, allow me to explain.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially, like with the sort of place that Horntusk would come from, is like actually a Minotaur and Orc mixed community where they pretty much get along together, since they're pretty similar in certain ways. Like they're one for fighting and strength, and yeah, they're pretty much cool with fighting each other. And pretty much every single establishment and building there is like the salty spittoon.
Mm-hmm.
Where you gotta like prove how tough you are before you can even enter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that and the significance of it being a gladiator, whereas you are in a fair consensual fight with another intelligent being.
Yep, it's a fair consensual fight between 2 different parties who both like agree, feel like we're gonna fight each other fair, and let's go.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we're gonna go from that. So I have this image to show. And so this is the character that I had created under this challenge. Okay, so his name is Epiphanios, but he has the stage name El Total. And he is effectively an Aztec ball player. He is also a gladiator. His feat traits involve him throwing what is a solid 40-pound black rubber ball with a skull drawn on it. Is that I played this character in a campaign before we got on tonight, and they gave him the nickname Spaulding. It goes along with Castaway and Tom Hanks naming his character Wilson.
Oh, that's nice.
So the original way that I had written this weapon is that he has the ability to throw at 40 feet, and it has the ability to bounce back 15 feet, and he would need to retrieve that. My DM had a little bit of mercy on me, and they told me that he can go ahead and just have that returned to him every time he throws that, and that can be a magical trait.
Oh, cool. Kind of like Captain America's shield.
Yeah, pretty much. And so, OS Devin in the chat has pointed out that said he's got a makohitl, which is a combination of a club and an axe that was frequently used by Aztec people. He's also wearing a helmet, and the helmet has a feathered headdress. He has a couple of tortoise shells for shoulder pads. He has wrist guards, and he also has knee pads. And the little netting inside that's where he puts the ball when he's not wielding it. Okay, so
yeah. Well, I wasn't able to like draw anything. I would have like had mine with some like pretty much some kind of like a flairish, just sort of like and sort of complex outfit, while still pretty much being rugged, since he's basically a wrestler here, like against like minotaurs, and so he would have like something similar to like a real world wrestler, or as well with more like things, especially things like cowhide, which would be wearing like a cow head and like on his like on the top of his head as like sort of like a hat, similar to how like Hercules wore the lion that he killed.
And this was precisely the kinds of things that were deployed in gladiatorial situations. Okay.
Yep,
so
exactly.
This is the character sheet. It just highlight a few things because a lot of that was just described by the images. He has reactionary maneuver brace. When a creature moves into the breach, you can use your reaction to expend 1 superiority die and make an attack against a creature using that weapon. If it hits, add the superiority die to the weapon's damage roll. So he has reactionary abilities as opposed to what you had used, which were similar to lock on, grapple, and drag on abilities, which you would use in bullfighting. What he has instead is that he has abilities that you would typically use if you were playing a ball game, is that combat superiority fueled by maneuvers that are fueled by superiority dice. I can spend superiority dice to do brace, which allows me to stand my ground in case I am being directly attacked by someone. Evasive footwork, which is pretty self-explanatory, is that you're light on your feet if you're trying to be playing a ball game. Pushing attacks, riposte attacks, which means is that you attack as a reaction whenever a character attacks you, but then misses. You take advantage of that situation, and then you get an extra attack. Know your enemy, which means that you can stand there for 1 minute and you can actually just observe what your character is doing, and then you can gain knowledge about how that character is going to maneuver. Which, once again, that's like a sportsman. You want to anticipate the way that the other character is going to move.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this pretty much makes sense as they contrast between our two characters. Like, one is more grappling, since what they do requires more, like, brute strength and, being able to hold on and not let go. Oh, and the other is pretty much able to work around everything and use a strategy.
Mm. And a few more here, the self-explanatory: adrenaline rush, relentless endurance, and also the athlete feat, which allows you to increase your strength and your dex. And when you're prone, standing up uses only 5 feet of your movement. Climbing doesn't cost you any extra movement, and you can make a running long jump or a running high jump after moving only 5 feet on foot rather than 10 feet.
Yep, I got things like aggressive, so like a horn tusk would be like his main fighting style would be like getting in close, and like pretty much not like giving the enemy a chance to get away.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I think I'm going to forego the actual anthropologic discussion at this point, because I think we've kind of covered all of the bases when it comes to what we fully intended to discuss in this situation. I really like the characters that you created, and we can probably use most of these characters, and we can put them in a scenario in one-shots of the Meowing Portal at some point in the future.
Oh, that sounds great. I'd love that. But I also like your character too. We also really like your character.
So in that scenario, what we'd effectively be doing is that we would be creating like an arena of orc-like sportsmanship that is informed by.
Oh, wait! I got an idea.
Yeah.
The Orc Olympics.
The Orc Olympics.
Get it?
Yeah, very well.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. Orc Olympics.
And given the way that we usually write tabletop RPG around here, it could very well be the Orc Olympics when it finally makes its debut. But let me just close off here by saying is that in the end, we didn't reach any kind of definitive conclusion when it comes to the role of this image and the role that it may potentially play in the upcoming 6th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, written by Wizards of the Coast, a subsidiary of Hasbro. So I want to say,
if I may come up with,
go ahead.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if I may come up with some sort of conclusion to, all the, is even with whatever we think might have been going on, even if this was made to be something good or bad, I think it's pretty safe to say that the execution went horribly.
Yeah. So this was provided with a surprisingly small amount of context. And I think what a lot of people are reacting to, even if they don't really have a particular way of articulating it, as in with the YouTube videos that we had just watched, what people are effectively trying to do is that they're trying to come to their own personal understanding of what a image like this has to do with the role playing that they're personally going to be doing when they're able to release these concepts from their own perspectives. And the play is a thing when it comes to tabletop RPG. Eventually, we're going to be the people who make the decisions as to whether or not we're going to include something like this, and we're also going to make the decision about what we are going to use when we make those developments. QB and I had successfully come up with a completely alternate way of representing Mexican-coded orcs in an environment that is going to be completely different than what is illustrated by this image. And when we eventually come out with that, then that's going to be perfectly okay. It's going to be fine and dandy. It's going to be our own creation, and we hope to bring it to you soon. And,
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see you at the Orc Olympics.
We'll see you
whatever
at the
that'll
Orc
be.
Olympics. Yeah, pretty much. So, I'm not going to be the one to cast final judgment on whether or not this sort of thing is a valid way for a organization like Wizards of the Coast, a subsidiary of Hasbro, to conduct themselves with. But ultimately, the final say is always going to be at people's own tabletops. And that's all I gotta say about that. Alright, so this concludes our broadcast day. Thank you very much for tuning in to the first episode of TTRPG and Sometimes Why. Devin in the chat has said, I love the art, but given the context we do have it, what? Like, why did they go with this direction? And also...
Yeah, I feel you, Devin. Like everyone, all the other YouTubers said, like, no shade against the artists. Like, no need to, like, blast the artists. Like, they did make good art, but it's like, exactly, it's like the implication of, like, suddenly making orcs Mexican.
We eventually have to come to an understanding about how we want to represent things, you know. That's not just to say that it isn't up to the people who actually publish the manuals, because they actually have their own 2 bits as well. But ultimately, you know, we're going to make this interpretation in a way that illustrates how we have a tendency to see certain kinds of tropes in history, in fiction, and as it applies to specific types of minority groups.
You are correct, Rainy. There are plenty of different ways to, like, integrate like actual culture into different sorts of into sort of different kinds of fantasy here. Or it could be for good or bad reason, and it could be done well or bad. But overall, at the end of the day, hey, we just need to ask why.
Yeah, why? And that's what we're here for. That's the why in TTRPG and Sometimes Why.
Yep, exactly.
Alright, so...
I actually plan to make that a little, like, ending, being one, like, specifically from me at the end of these.
Yeah. Okay, well, we'll remember that for next time.
Yeah.
You'll be responsible for all of the whys from this point forward.
Alright.
Alright, so we're going to go... Those of you who are watching us on Twitch, we're going to be doing a raid now. So let's see, who would we like to pay a visit to? I think, well, we could go over to Akami. They're in the middle of playing Final Fantasy XIV. I'm not very good at Roman numerals. What is that? Is that 14? I believe it's 14.
I have no idea either, but I often like to play that game, like, for a certain period of time, then take a break, and then, like, after a while, go back to it.
Yeah. Alright, so we're going to go on to Akami, and she's going to be playing Final Fantasy 14. So... thank you, everybody, once again for tuning into this very first episode. We hope to bring you more of this and just more content that has to do with tabletop RPGs right here on the Tabletop RPG channel on Twitch. In the meantime, though, remember BRNY being smart. Nothing is too hard if you use your head. Always be the change you want to see in the world. Oh, you know, something I've been meaning to ask. What does KYUBEY stand for?
It stands for Cube, which is me.
Okay, well, that's good enough for me. All right, folks, thank you, everybody, once again for tuning in. We're going to be back in a little bit more of next week. We're going to have some Let's Plays of Kingdom Hearts, Paper Mario, and some third thing. I don't know. I have to check to see
I might come on again for some co-op stuff.
Absolutely. So, thank you, everybody, once again for tuning in. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.